Let me fix this. Okay, we are live on YouTube. We are live on IG. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the 5G. So like last week, so we'll start with a little bit of a precursor, right? So last week we talked a little bit about the history, right? How we got here. And if you haven't, the Cinco de Mayo, we should call it the Cinco de Mayo. That would actually be hilarious. Well, so someone will be watching this and be like, it's October. What are we talking about Cinco de Mayo for? Um, so last week, if you want to learn more about the why, I would go back to last week's video. It's on YouTube. I'm not sure if it's on Instagram, but it's on YouTube for now. Might have to be talking in a little bit of code because this is the way regulations are going on YouTube, on Instagram. I would say if you want the untouched content, if you will, sign up for the Becoming Invincible newsletter. That's where you're going to get the whole thing. You're going to get everything that is uncensored, comes out every week. I'll be releasing this in written format in a lot more detail tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up for it, it's for free. I'm dropping new ones every Friday. Yeah, that's where you can check it out. So Becoming Invincible newsletter. But let's just get right into this. So a lot of these, so I mentioned there's a few institutes last week, if you remember. One of the ones that some of the recommendations I'm going to be talking about when it comes to non-natives, EMFs, and then 5G, 5G unit, Cinco de Mayo, they're going to be coming from this institute called the Building Biology Institute. So I highly recommend going to their website. They have some really good information. They're probably one of the better ones out there as far as giving you a holistic view on it as kind of an organization from an organizational standpoint. I will do a shout out as well. I think my buddy Street MD did a live with, oh man, I'm going to forget her name. But her name is Tech Wellness on Instagram. You could check her out. She has some cool products too. The point here, though, with this is we got to find solutions. So we need to first start off with this realization that when it comes to 5G, when it comes to non-natives, I might just say non-natives and leave it at that. There is no way we're going to get to 0% exposure. Not in the normal, not in the modern life. Modern humans are just not going to get there. So the goal really with protection here is to control the controllables. Now, for each person, that's going to be a little different. And depending on where you are or proximity, how close you live to these things, that could change. Like if you live on top of it, the answer might be you might have to move. And that's not obviously the most convenient, but sometimes that's what it takes. Obviously, you're not going to have, control over, say, if your neighbor, if you live in an apartment, leaves their Wi-Fi on at night or something of the sort, you're not going to have that. But generally speaking, testing, I would say, is a good place to start. And there are plenty of testers out there. We'll get into it. Generally, there's four main factors you look for with non-native EMF exposure, right? It's the strength of the source, so the power something emits, the distance between you and the source, right? The more distance, the better. The frequency, i.e. the energy. So the higher frequency, the more energy something will have, but also it doesn't penetrate as deep. And then the duration of the exposure. So when you use testing materials like, say, a tri-field meter or a Cornet ED88T, or a GS meter, and you could look into all these. I'll have these written tomorrow, so don't worry about it. They all have pros and cons, but they take those first three, so the power density, the distance, and the frequency, and basically put them into one reading. And they all have pros and cons, so there's no perfect meter, and that's another tricky thing too. So the biggest thing you need to worry about is the duration, i.e. how long are you exposed to X, right? Now, generally speaking, in homes, there's two primary sources of non-natives. So we have electrical appliances and we have electric wiring. Those are kind of the main two. This is why getting a meter is useful. You can actually test each of these devices in your home, and you can see, like, okay, how much radiation is the stove giving off, or the router giving off, or the TV, or everything in between. The baby monitors, which we are going to cover first, by the way. Now, if you want the TLDR for today, it's going to be very simple, but we're going to get into the details. And the TLDR, if you want it, is get rid of as many unnecessary electronics in your life. That's going to include any wearable devices like AirPods, like smartwatches, Oura Rings. If you have or own a Tesla, I'm sorry to say, but you might want to trade that thing in. You do not want to be riding on top of a microwave. That is not a great idea, in my opinion. Modern lighting certainly would be something worth changing. So compact fluorescent bulbs, CFLs, older LEDs that are only in this blue light spectrum, not ideal. So these are all basic things that you're going to want to look for solutions for. We're going to go over some of the big ones now. Now, considering when I made a post about baby monitors earlier this week, I actually updated this section because I wasn't planning on adding it. But apparently there was some pushback with baby monitors specifically. So apparently what I need folks to realize is that the baby monitor was invented in 1937. Believe it or not, human beings existed before 1937, and not every baby died. They made it. They survived without baby monitors. So I will start this by just saying there is no healthy, if you will, replace baby monitor alternative. The best option is to not use one. By far, that is the best option. I would say, if you're really frustrated about it, consider moving the crib, say, into your room, the parents' bedroom. That way you don't need one at all. The old school method of walking up the stairs and checking on the child, whatever, every 30 minutes, an hour or so, seemed to work pretty well for a long time. But here's the problem with baby monitors specifically. Right now, and just for context, think about this. If maybe you are a parent, or maybe people in your town, and say they're looking to put a Cinco de Mayo tower right next to your child's school. Would you not hear some pushback or be part of the pushback on that? So why would you not? What I don't understand is, why is that energy not taken to baby monitors as well? Especially considering that these are going to be much closer to the child for hours a day, every single day. So there's this concept when it comes to electromagnetic fields called the inverse square law. And basically what it says is, for every time you double the distance further from the source, the exposure is the inverse of the square of the distance. I know that's a lot, but say okay, this is, 1 foot. I'm making this up. But if we move from 1 foot to 2 feet, the radiation from 1 to 2 is actually 1/4. It's not halved because it's 2 squared, inverse square law. So it's 1 over the distance. If I triple it to 3 feet, now it's not 1 over 3, it's 1/9. It's 1/9 the radiation from 1 foot. So distance is super, super important when it comes to this. And this is why, you should never actually carry, say, your cell phone. And you can actually read this on the instructions, or if you actually read the fine print on all these phones, they will say, you have to actually, you should not be keeping the phone on your person. You have to actually have it a small distance away if you want to reach the already useless guideline numbers that we use. So keep that in mind. Now, why baby monitors specifically are a problem is, one, we're dealing with babies who, believe it or not, are tiny human beings. Now, one thing with tiny human beings is they have tiny skulls, and they are also thinner. Now, there are some other differences too. There are differences with bone marrow and stem cells and water, the amount of water in the skull cavity. All of these things are going to make babies and children, to be honest, more susceptible to the damages of something like microwave or radio frequency type of radiation, more so than adults. And you could see this. Well, there aren't a ton of, studies on baby monitors specifically. They work essentially the same way as cell phones. And there are studies done on cell phone and how radiation penetrates skulls of different ages of human beings. And you can easily look up some of these pictures. I'm going to have one in the post tomorrow, so you can check it out. So, that might be worth, looking, just considering with this. So we're dealing with small people who are getting inundated with, in this case, radio frequencies, microwaves, and potentially Wi-Fi for this sense of security. And these kids, usually, by the way, these baby monitors are kept close to the crib. Why? Because you have to see what's going on. So that brings it, that again, we talk about the inverse square law. The closer it is, the more problematic it is. So knowing that these baby monitors work literally the same way your phone does, why would you want to keep that close to a child? They operate in basically the same frequencies, and you get the unfortunate effect of adding Wi-Fi in the more modern ones. So, and we know non-native, non-natives and Cinco de Mayos are associated with, reproductive issues, immune system issues, depression, anxiety, poor brain development, poor cognitive function, mental health issues. Like, we always look at like the depression of the FOMO part of it, but this stuff actually plays a role in this as well. So there is no solution. The best solution for baby monitors is to not use one. And like I said, and there is no replacing that. I will talk about some for a little bit, but there is no replacing them. So, if you have to keep the baby in your room when you sleep, that is a much better option. If you have to check on the baby, every 30 minutes when you're home or whatever you think is a comfortable amount of time, do that. It is a much better option than any of the other options that I'm going to talk about. So if you're going to fight on this and say, no, I absolutely have to use a baby monitor, I would look for a low emission baby monitor. Now, these are not obviously safe. It's in the name, low emission. They are still emitting some of this stuff. They're not as bad. These are going to be much harder to find, especially nowadays, but basically they work the way walkie-talkies used to. The old analog baby monitors, which was basically just like an open line between two walkie-talkies. That was effectively what the old school baby monitors were. Now, there are drawbacks to this. You're not going to have Wi-Fi. You're not going to have video. There is a chance that you might get crosstalk depending on the frequencies used, but that is total. That's, if that's a deal breaker for you, that's something, you can look into. Obviously, if you're going to use it, you want to limit it as much as possible. So, if you absolutely have to have it at night, just use it at night, keep it as far away as possible, et cetera, et cetera. Some people can actually make, anyone, you can too, kind of like a makeshift Faraday cage, but you will have to, unfortunately, have one part of it open. So, because that signal needs to, at some point, get to the other part, right? The parent monitor, if you will. So, something as simple as like a steel, garbage can actually work. Like the signal will just go straight out the top. And this might be a little bit better, especially if you can keep the monitor above the baby. Again, not ideal, but if you're dead set on having one and are going to fight me on it, that would be a way to do it. So yeah, that would be something. And then the other thing is really important is, as these kids get older, and I know it's getting harder because this is going to be on all of us as adults, is we have to lead by example. We do not, especially as young kids, want them getting hooked on these screens where they're connected to Wi-Fi and cell towers and they're holding them on their lap all day. And it's going to cause issues from a fertility standpoint, from a cognitive standpoint. from a mental health standpoint, and many others if they're on these devices all the time. And the truth of the matter is these kids learn from the people they're around a lot, and they are freaking smart. So that is going to take some work also on the parents' end too. So beyond baby monitors, we have to also be cognizant of our own tech hygiene, because that is going to lay the foundation, for them growing up. Now, so that's baby monitors. Sleeping environment. Now, if we're talking about the interior of the house, and we have to start in one place, in my opinion, the bedroom is the most important. Why? Because we spend most of the time in the house in the bedroom. And, obviously, even if you're just sleeping there, that's probably most of the time you're in your house anyway. That's where detoxification, that's where repair occurs. That's where melatonin secretion happens, at least in the pineal gland. And we talked about this last week. Melatonin is the most powerful antioxidant in the body. So that's kind of important. We kind of need that. So all of that is going to come while you sleep. So creating a healthy sleep environment, that would be the first place I would look. Now, there's two ways that melatonin production gets inhibited in the pineal gland. It's light exposure, which I'm sure everyone's fairly familiar with to some degree, but also non-native exposure. That can also affect your ability to produce melatonin. And if you're affecting this in a negative way, that's going to affect detoxification and repair in the body. So making sure we are limiting non-native exposure, particularly at night, is really important. So, the goal is to make the bedroom is to create an EMF environment that resembles nature, which is the Schumann resonance, as possible. We want to make it as close to nature as possible. So we don't want any artificial light coming in through the window. So, your neighbors, your street light, you want blackout shades. You do not want any cell phone use in your bedroom. Now, listen, I use my cell phone as an alarm clock. It is on airplane mode, and it is on the opposite side of the room. I cannot reach it. I physically have to get out of bed to get it and walk. So, if you have a cordless phone, and this is something for later, I would ditch any cordless phone. If you have a landline, get it out of the room. Get the cordless phones out. Get rid of the wireless speakers. And if you have anything plugged in that's electrical, I would unplug them, because they are, to a degree, going to let off electromagnetic fields. We talked about this last week. If you have an electric current flowing, you are creating a magnetic field around that. So if you have any electrical devices in your bedroom, I would highly suggest unplugging them, especially if they're on your nightstand. So, lamps, etc., whatever, I would unplug these. If you have fluorescent lights or LED lights in your bedroom, I strongly suggest getting those out. I know it's hard to get incandescent bulbs or red bulbs. If you can find them, these are going to be much better options. Wi-Fi router, unplug it or turn it off at night. Blackout curtains, I mentioned that. I personally am not a fan of taking melatonin as a supplement exogenously. If you're on that, or if you're on sleeping medications, like, you have to figure out why. So get to the root cause as to why and start fixing that. Grounding and exercise are going to be fantastic for making sure you're getting ideal sleep, as well as morning sunlight. Now, we'll cover grounding and morning sunlight a little bit later, but that's what we're going to cover. Now, I saw someone in the comments mention crystals. As you notice, I wear shungite bracelets pretty much every day. So there's 4 different crystals that I think are pretty good at negating some of the negative effects of non-natives and Cinco de Mayos. And those are going to be shungite, black tourmaline, pyrite, which is fool's gold, so it looks kind of gold, and hematite. They're all black or dark stones. So you probably see in the picture here, this is a shungite bracelet. I have a black tourmaline pyramid that I keep on my desk in my computer and me for that reason. But you can get other things to kind of help with that. So those crystals can be useful. I wear the bracelets pretty much every day. Most of the day, unless I'm doing some sort of, working out or some sort of athletic activity or like playing a sport or something like that, then obviously I take them off. But outside of that, there are pendants you could certainly wear. So those would be the 4 different stones: shungite, black tourmaline, pyrite, hematite. You could get them in pyramids as standalones. You could get them as bracelets. You can get creative with it. There are certainly pendants that have it. So you can get a lot. So yeah, one more time: shungite, black tourmaline, pyrite, and hematite. Those would be the 4. Now let's talk about wires. So obviously, most things are wireless nowadays. Not ideal, because when you're going wireless with something, that means there has to be some sort of radio frequency, microwave frequency that is pinging that in a cell tower or wherever it's communicating with. So, and that is constantly happening. These are pulsed. Now, when they're pulsed, unfortunately, that's another issue because there's nothing in nature that works on an alternating current or is pulsed. So, and these happen with your phone, say 6 to 12 times a minute, every single day. So that's constantly disrupting the natural electromagnetic fields that we give off, that the Earth gives off, that we call the Schumann resonance, etc. So this is one of the reasons why, if you have a Wi-Fi signal, obviously, I do, a lot of people do, unplug it at night. You can certainly get a timer, and hook it up to it so it turns off at a certain time at night. There are certain kill switches that you can find that you can also just remote shut it off at night, or whenever you're not using it, you can shut it off. Get a wired mouse. So, if you have wireless computer peripherals, keyboards, mouses, microphones, whatever, try to get wired ones. Bluetooth. So even if you're using, say, a wired keyboard, wired mouse, and the Bluetooth is still on, your computer is going to continue to transmit the Bluetooth signal. So you have to manually go in and shut off Bluetooth. So that would be something worth doing. I've talked about this before. I am not a fan of any wearable health devices that are going to give off any sort of non-native, and that includes things like Oura rings, continuous glucose monitors, AirPods, Fitbits, smartwatches. You do not need any of these things. What we need is to actually get back have a real connection with our body. We do not need any of them. Some people will say, like for an Oura ring, I could shut it off and then just transfer the data at night. I mean, if you're dead set on having it, you could do that. I'm personally I'm out on all of it. This is just going to be information that you can learn on your own qualitatively as you get in touch with your body. And you don't have to rely on these devices that are tracking everything you do regardless, and that data is being sent somewhere. So, and that's not even talking about the actual health components of wearing these devices that are constantly sending out non-native EMFs that are disrupting your rhythms, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. Just because you cannot see or feel these things do not mean they're not happening. Alexa, if you have any of these things, the Google Home, Alexa, throw them out. Get rid of them. Printers. So if you have a printer, have the USB cable where you actually physically connect your computer to the printer. So you're not sending, again, a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi signal, depending on how the printer works. Already talked about electric vehicles. You do not want to be riding on top of a microwave. That will probably not be good for your health. Power cords. You want to make sure you have grounded power cords. I should have brought an example with me. But basically, a grounded power cord. So you see, a grounded power cord would be one that has the 3 prongs. So you have the 2 prongs and the one rounded one on the bottom. That bottom one is the grounding prong. So if you have chargers or anything like that, if you can opt for the 3-pronged ones with the grounded ones, that's gonna be where you want to go. For the love of God, do not put your laptop on your lap. Despite the name, it is not supposed to be there. It's actually technically called a notebook. They have changed the name for this reason. So you certainly, and you can actually, you feel the generated heat. Where's that coming from? It's from these signals. Yes, the battery to some degree, but which also radiates its own electromagnetic fields, but also the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc. Do you want that on top of very sensitive tissues, testes or ovaries or any sort of reproductive organ, in that area? Not a good idea. Also, if possible, if you could switch to Ethernet from wire, which is essentially wired internet. A lot of new houses are obviously not going to have these. Some super old houses aren't going to have these. So this might be a little tricky. But, you do the best you can with that. Also plants, believe it or not. So plants actually will help keep the air clean in wherever you're spending a lot of time. House plants like cacti, snake plants, all these types of plants are going to be very helpful as far as cleaning the air and sometimes can help with sensitivity. So these are all, pretty small. And a lot of this, like I said, it is cutting this stuff out, which in a lot of ways I think is a good thing. But yeah, they add up and make a massive difference, not only with your sleep, mental health, like this stuff picks up. And again, just because you're not feeling it outright right now does not mean it's not happening. We don't even perceive, we cannot see over 60% of the energy that the sun gives off. So remember that. Now, cell phones. I am not delusional enough to think that you or me are giving up our cell phones, overnight. But we do need to realize that as these technologies get more advanced, with the rollout of Cinco de Mayo, we're seeing more towers being put up, which is a problem. So the real question becomes, what distance is a safe distance? You're not going to be left with many options here, but I'll try to answer this question as best I can. I found 2 studies that looked at this. One out of Germany, one out of Israel. They were basically done the same way. I think each of them were around 1,000 people. And they essentially went to, how'd they do it? Yes, they went to people who lived within a mile radius of a cell tower and polled the people who lived in that house for at least 10 years. And what they found was that those who lived within a quarter mile or 400 meters of a cell tower were 3 to 4 times more likely to develop any kind of cancer. Quarter mile. So that's pretty wild. You're talking about a 3 to 4 times increase in cancer rates just based on proximity where you live in respect to a tower. Now, obviously, you could take that information, use for what you will with children, and schools, of course. That's going to be a major, major issue and already is, but also, where you live. And, at that point, you really have 2 options. Like, you can shield your home as best you can, which is probably not the better option. The better option is moving. Now, obviously, that's not convenient for everyone, but some people like it will actually have to get to that point. Now, if you want to check, how does this affect you? You can actually do this. There's a website called antennasearch.com. You can plug in your address, and you can actually see how many cell towers and cell antennas are within, I think it's like a 3-mile radius of whatever address you put in. So I actually did this, and turns out there are 12 towers, and I live in a pretty rural area now, and 70 antennas within a 3-mile radius of where I am right now. Now, that might sound like a lot. However, though, the closest antennas, not even towers, antennas are 3/4 of a mile away. So that's a decent distance. Because like I said, a lot of these issues were within literally a quarter mile. What did happen, though, it turns out, so I'm from New York City, if you guys don't know. I actually plugged in the first high school I went to in Manhattan. And as of when I researched it this week, there were 954 cell towers and 12,536 antennas within a 3-mile radius of, in this case, it's like lower Manhattan. Bear in mind, in Manhattan, there's a river on 2 sides. Well, 3 sides, technically, of lower Manhattan. But a lot of that square mileage is actually water. So imagine like if New Jersey and Brooklyn were connected to Manhattan, how many more there would be. So again, if you want to check it out, it's antennasearch.com, antennasearch.com. And again, I'll put it in the post tomorrow so you can check it out. But yeah, antennasearch.com. Now, again, if you're living like within, especially like a quarter mile, but I mean, you could argue even further than that, like by far the best move for long-term health would unfortunately be moving. Again, not the most practical, but, or maybe it is, depending on how seriously you take this. But yeah, like that's going to be the best option. Now, the best thing you can do otherwise, if you're like, no, I'm dead set on staying where I'm at, whatever. I personally like the Defender Shield products. You know, you do the best you can in the home. I do think it's more important for most people to address the inside of the home before the outside. And yeah, that's where I would start. You know, there's a link in my bio if you want to check those out, but those are the ones I like. You could certainly look into other things too. So there are different types of paints, different types of other things that you can kind of use to kind of mitigate some of this. There's copper meshes, certain types of fabrics that you could look into that can help with some of this shielding. Now, obviously, the trade-off to this is you're going to lose some of that signal in your house. So you're going to have to gauge like how important that is for you. Some of these things don't work as well with the higher bands too. So in the Cinco de Mayo spectrum, like if you go above 20 gigahertz, some of these shielding measures, you might have to look at things like aluminum and paints only, because some of these things like just don't work. So you're going to have to kind of depend. If you're a part of the smart meter system, I would highly suggest opting out of that. It's worth spending the $10 to have someone come and actually check the meters every so often, than having it constantly ping out the information to the water company, to the utility company, electric company. Those are going 24/7 in your house. So the smart meter system, I would opt out of if you have an option to do it. Yeah, like another thing I would just want to touch on, like solar panels. So sometimes with solar panels, they can emit something like known as dirty electricity. This essentially is kind of like changes in voltage from where you're at or where you're supposed to be. And sometimes those emitted things can cause problems too. Solar panels specifically can sometimes cause an issue with this, but also things like dimmer switches, fluorescent bulbs. We talked about this. Smart meters do it. LED bulbs, washing machines, certain pumps, anything with like a motor. So even like your blender can do it, although at a very small level, but it happens. So like a blender, food processor, something that has a motor. At a very small level, though. That being said, solar panels tend to be the biggest source of this. As far as I know, there are ways that you can actually mitigate some of that, although I haven't been able to find much personally. So, you know, that's something you can look into if you have that. Before finally, but some of the things we got to talk about is certain nutrients that are depleted when you're exposed to these things for a long time. And this is where like the nutrition part of things is nice and important, but you're not going to out supplement a crappy environment. You can't do it. So, you know, I'm going to talk about a lot of things that get depleted. You're going to realize that a lot of these things, I could just rattle some off. It's calcium, selenium, zinc, vitamins A, C, and E, certain B vitamins, magnesium. All of these things are electrolytes, and we kind of talked about this, last week a little bit. Is when you're adding to that oxygenase, reactive oxygen species, inflammation, fire, you need these things to cool it down. And if they're constantly being sapped because you're exposing yourself all the time to these things, herbals and food can help to a point, but at some point you have to realize none of this is anything that humans have ever been around ever before 100 years ago. So technically the 1880s-ish, 1890s, but you get my point. Like, this is all brand new. So you have to kind of keep that in mind here. It is unfortunate that we don't perceive any of this. Even in the UV and a lot of the infrared spectrum, we have no perception of this. Some of infrared we perceive as heat, but the visible spectrum is less than 1% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And all of it we do not perceive. Some people can feel it a little bit with certain things for sure, but you have to realize, like, this is always happening. So it's really, really important. The website really quick. It is antennasearch.com. Antennasearch.com. Yeah. So again, it will be in my post tomorrow. So, you can read it on the Becoming Invincible blog. I'll have a link to it in there. So no worries. But calcium, we know non-native Cinco de Mayos, or anywhere in between, any of those, are going to negatively affect the function of calcium channels, which calcium is the most abundant mineral in the body, so not ideal. Most of the electrolytes and antioxidant type of nutrients, selenium, potassium, zinc, copper, vitamin B6, magnesium, vitamin A, C, and E, thiamine, which is B1. All of these are going to get depleted with non-native exposure. So yeah. Now, the final two things we got to talk about are things we've talked about basically for the last month and a half, which are sunlight and grounding. Grounding is fantastic because it's actually one of the ways you can negate any static electricity that you've built up. It's actually a way that you let go and then re-regulate back to the earth. You come down back to the Schumann resonance. You equalize with the Schumann resonance. So grounding is a fantastic tool. Just go outside, get your feet on the ground, grass, water, sand, dirt, even concrete works, believe it or not. So all of them, fantastic. Take your shoes off and touch the earth. It's going to be one of the best ways to protect you. And to be honest, as long as you are connected, you are going to have a much better, you have more protection as long as you are connected to the earth. Most of us aren't 90+% of the time per day or every day. The sunlight thing is really important too. Why? Because a lot of this damage that we talk about creates reactive oxygen species, right? ROS, reactive oxygen species. What infrared light does is it helps activate the cells themselves to create melatonin. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Most of the melatonin in our body is not in the pineal gland. It's in the mitochondria of each cell. It actually takes information, in this case, light information from the infrared spectrum that we cannot see, and tells cells to ramp up melatonin production, which acts as the coolant for these reactive oxygen species that are created through the electron transport chain. I know that's a lot of words I just threw at you. You have to go through what I've read. There's a reason I was doing this in this order. And I could talk about this in more detail. Honestly, like light and everything that plays a role is so important, which is why I wanted to do all those before getting to this point. So if you haven't read those, I would check it out first. But generally during the morning, you want to awaken before the sunrise. You want to get as much sunlight exposure on your eyes and skin in the morning as much as you can. that's reasonable, but you want to get as much skin exposure as possible. Midday, you want to, again, get indirect and direct sunlight as much as possible. Again, with different skin tones, etc., like you might have to work up to this. So, at least I would say 15 minutes in the morning, midday, and then sunset, all super important. So sunlight routine, I would say that is super, super important. And you cannot replace that. You cannot replace resetting your circadian rhythm, getting that melatonin production in the cells started in the morning, and resetting your circadian rhythm. So this goes back to sleep. All of this is connected, and all of this will help with non-native and Cinco de Mayo exposure. So, these are the tools that I use. Now, listen, I recently, some of the tools that I use, I have the raw optic glasses that you might see me at night on the lives that are the blue light blocking ones. I really like those. I have codes for the stuff if you want it. The Defender Shield products I mentioned. There are some red light and infrared stuff that is useful, but you have to understand you would get the same benefits in sunlight because sunlight gives you the entire spectrum. So when I see studies kind of like last week where it says just red light, so visible red light exposure radiated onto the back for 15 minutes can lower blood glucose levels, what that tells me actually is that there is a UV infrared imbalance. We're getting more UV than we should, and we don't have the infrared to balance it out. And we know that UV actually is going to kick up the stress response in the body. When you have excess cortisol, you're going to release more blood sugar. So when you have red light, that's going to bring it down. The only way to get the full spectrum is to go outside and get the sun. Red light stuff can be useful. I like some of the bond charge stuff, but again, it does not replace and cannot replace actually going out in the sun. So those are the big tips. That's what I got for today. I could stick around and answer like one or two questions on IG. But before I do that, I just want to, quickly, like if you want to read and see some of the links of this stuff I talked about, sign up for the Becoming Invincible newsletter. This is coming out tomorrow morning in more detail. So it will all be covered. If you want to start transforming your health with food and you have not checked out my ebook, Nature's Kitchen and Cabinet, it is a wealth of information. It's like 160 pages. There's no pictures. It's all there. It's a lot of the concepts that I talk about in food form. You can check it out. And if you want to talk more about insulin resistance, if you want to learn more about it and you have not checked out my insulin resistance reversal masterclass, it's free. The link's in my bio for all three of these. This is, my goal. Like my goal is to empower as many people as possible to take charge of their health because this is all there for the taking. They're making it harder for you, but it's there for the taking. So, check out the newsletter, check out the ebook, check out the webinar. That's what I got for YouTube. It was a pleasure, and I'll see you guys next week.